Woods had been a reporter after he left school, teaching school at the New York Evening Sun, when he did the police beat. He also studied policing over in Europe, and for 2 years he was an assistant commissioner at the NYPD and head of the Detective Bureau, and already began to make his mark through 1909, one of which was to set up the first homicide bureau, and making fingerprints records. And also, he was very aggressive about trying to send back Italian criminals who had snuck in and were not legal immigrants. In fact, he insisted on getting 700 records, criminal records, so he could help send these criminals back. And there was a huge fight over it, and the Tammany Hall political organization stopped him, refused to allow those documents to come into the U.S. because Tammany Hall used a lot of those Italian criminals, including the Black Hand. And I'll talk a little bit about what the Black Hand was in a few minutes. And then he became a lumber manager in Mexico before he was picked to help out John Boy Mitchell in the election called the Fusion Party, which was a mix, a crossover between the Republicans and Democrats aligned against Tammany Hall, which was one of the biggest payoff organizations around. Corrupt, but also in the sense that it did take care of its own. Just could never get any reform done through Tammany Hall. Well, so you might say it was something like the Wild East when he started. Corruption was understood to be all the way, certainly to the precinct level. And the way it worked, it thrived on plainclothes policemen who weren't detectives at all. They were the collectors of graft. They could easily mingle. They would collect the money. They would give it to the precinct sergeant who would pass it up to the lieutenants and the captains, and everybody got a cut. And although a lot of money was changing hands, the policeman actually, the guy in the beat didn't actually keep much of it. And he had to pay to get his position, and captains had to pay a lot to get their positions. At this time, a fellow named Francesco Spinella had been fighting a lonely 6-year war with the Black Hand. They called him the man who hadn't slept for a year, and his hair turned white. He was a property owner, a tenement owner on 11th Street, and in 1908, he got his first warning letter demanding $7,000 from the extortion group called the Black Hand, and he had to supposedly pay $7,000. He refused to do it. He said, "I'm going to draw the line." They began setting off bombs in his tenements and shooting at him, and he managed to stick it out all the way through the arrival of Arthur Woods. But he kind of personified how tough it was to deal with the Black Hand, which was as simple as a group hiring guys to go around and plant bombs and to drop off letters. And if you didn't pay, then they would shoot at you or blow up your house or your store. Lots of anarchists, bully boys who were fellas hired to beat up during the Union riots. And then the saboteurs on the way. And that's a picture of the bomb materials that were being made a couple months later in the New York harbor on the German ships. Well, Woods came into this, and it turns out he was just the right guy for something called a wicked problem. And that's a term now in systems management. A wicked problem is something that it's so tangled up, it just seems like nobody can get a grip on it. Oh, one wicked problem today would be health care. How do you go about fixing affordable health care? How do you go about fixing street drugs? Those are wicked problems. Well, he had plenty of those too. He began his first day by taking over from the previous commissioner. The interesting thing is he spent all the next night walking the streets with his assistant commissioners to get a sense for how things had changed since 1909, when he also walked the streets through the night with young men from Harvard, seeing how the life of the city worked. And as a reporter, I can endorse that. The most interesting times are always after midnight. So whenever I have a chance to visit, one of which Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I asked to come late at night, about 2 a.m., because that's when you find out how things really work. And certainly Woods believed that. You could find how the graft, how the extortion worked after midnight, including in all the saloons. So the Rosenthal killing was in many ways a gift to people like Woods, because it was so shocking to have a police informer killed by the police that it really broke down the status quo. And you might say that that was the diem for the Carpe Diem. That was the day that came along, that Woods seized. It wouldn't have lasted all that long. I believe like the 9/11 moment. You know, we had a lot of spirit, a lot of chipping in, but it really didn't last all that long. You need somebody to institutionalize that spirit and take it to the streets and keep it alive and make it grow. And essentially that's what Woods did. He took that 9/11 moment, that Rosenthal killing, and he turned the city around. This title, The Man Who Came Back, what's that? His name was Max Schmidberger. And at this time, when Woods came in, he was a chief inspector. And so some people could reasonably say, this man is corrupt, or at least he was. And he admitted that in 1894. He was a major collector of graft for the police. But he decided to turn over a new leaf, and he actually stood up against Tammany Hall, who intimidated him constantly for the next 20 years. So Max Schmidberger was the kind of guy that Woods turned to because he knew the system. He had been corrupt, but as Schmidberger said, I'm going to run straight now. And he did. And that was just the fellow that Woods needed. They called him the man who came back. The big plan was, and this is where you get into the emergency management, change the police from what some people called sort of a black handler without the bombs. That's how people saw the police. Exploiters. Well, he wanted to change that to a helper. So he began reforming the police department from the inside, not by firing people. You couldn't do that in New York. Actually, the turnover wasn't that great, but it's by harnessing the people on the streets, including street kids, including people who had never been asked to do anything by the police. He called them the junior police. They had badges. They went out to keep order in the streets. And one of the things they did was help out the police close off streets, and they called them play streets. Woods was a big on statistics, and he noticed statistically, he really drummed up the numbers by 1950, that hundreds of children were getting killed in the traffic of New York. And he said, this is just intolerable. Among all the many other wicked problems, we've got to stop this. And they realized, since no one else would deal with it, and they wouldn't even talk about it because it was so embarrassing and shameful, he said, well, we'll do it if no one else will. And they began closing off streets so the kids could play after 3 p.m. Immensely successful. As simple as just closing off the street. So you couldn't have all the cars racing through there. And then kids began taking an interest in the police, who had been before just somebody that would kick them around for causing trouble, which they did. And so they signed up as junior police, and Woods insisted every station house have a gymnasium or a basketball court. So they would come and play there. He had all the station houses have Christmas trees, so the kids would come there during the holidays. He raised money for the kids. And the police became more fit because now they had an exercise regimen at their station houses. And he also trained them in a place called Fort Wadsworth for emergencies. Woods said part of this copper to helper thing is we've got to get ready for what is around the corner. And he took that to heart as far as a rescue function. Not fire, because the fire department did that, but they called it heavy rescue. And they equipped trucks with jacks, railroad jacks, and things that could be used during collapses, winches, wrecking bars. And this slide you see here is part of a promotional campaign. I'll read it for you. One of Woods' contributions. See the policeman? He's holding a young child. He said, "You who drive, help people to help themselves. Ask your policeman for a safety booklet. It's free." Signed, Arthur Woods, Police Commissioner. You begin to take action, and those wicked problems begin to sort themselves out. And instead of seeing it as a hopeless situation, what Woods saw was, by solving one problem, you actually begin to subdue another problem too. Mainly by giving people confidence that the police are on their side and that the police need their help. They need the citizens' help. In order to begin to build a system, and it took a couple of years for it, well, how do you build a system to deal with catastrophic failures, big fires, hurricanes? How do you go about doing this? This picture at the bottom, that's the